Monday morning. Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is Jeremy coming at you once again with Redtired Podcast, and I'm here with the old faithful, my old single co-host, my, what the hell are you? What do I call you?
just the one in the shadows. No, I'm just...
My faithful sidekick, Jacob. My companion, my pal, my amigo, my friend, my buddy.
How's it going, brother?
Another day that I woke up. So, I mean, any day that you wake up is a good day.
Oh, yeah. It's always a blessed day, isn't it?
It is. And the sun is shining. It looks like we might actually have a little bit of decent weather today.
Oh, yeah. Sun is shining over here. It's beautiful. We'll probably hit the beach. It's like 5 minutes away. Pretty excited about that. And actually explore the town a little bit more because we haven't really done so. And did you know, before we even get started, today's topic on our next part for digging out and dig is I get to see Donald Trump. I got my tickets. He's coming here.
You racist. Why do you hate women?
Yeah. This will be on Monday, so hopefully I see him on Saturday, this past Saturday.
Yeah. So there's a convention then.
Yep.
And
He's
where's it?
Here.
Yeah, where's it being held?
North Charleston, which is 10 minutes away.
How big is the stadium?
I don't know. I know I'm gonna have to get there early.
Yeah,
I should not be here now and be waiting in line.
Have you seen the lines of the people?
Actually, hold on. Let's take everyone with the podcast, and I'm gonna go over there now. I have a camera crew follow me there.
Bye. We'll be back right after these messages from our sponsors.
No, but I'm excited to see him. I've been trying to see him multiple times. Just, I got my tickets for inauguration and, things came up and I wasn't able to make it during that time because of, my wife being pregnant at the time. And also just
women. They ruin everything.
No, but I can't wait to see him. Hopefully it works out. Yeah,
that's awesome. Have you seen some of the lines that these people wait in to get up there to see him, just to get into the rallies? It's insane. Did you get good tickets, good seats? Do they have a signing?
They don't have anything like that.
First come, first serve.
Yep.
So you better be waiting in line for like 2 days. It's kind of like getting a new iPhone.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyway, I'm here to see Donald Trump. How long you been waiting in line? 7 days.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring a good book with me.
Yeah, make sure you do, and a jacket just in case.
So the Secret Service can take it away.
1984. We're gonna have to confiscate this, so I really apologize for that right there.
No, but speaking of books, one of the questions I get is that, how did I get started reading? What was that one book that kind of changed your ways and made you a reader? Because to be honest, I was a troublemaker in school. I did not take reading seriously. I remember reading those, those, or not reading, but I remember giving those assignments that read The Outsiders. Here's the book. Take it home, read it, and we're going to do an assignment. Yeah,
I love that book.
I'm going to watch the movie. I had that kind of attitude, or even back then, Mice of Men.
The book was so much better than the movie.
Yeah.
But to answer your first question, the book that got me into reading, because I'm going to throw this out there because that's what I do as a host. I have that authority. Ha, ha, ha. The first book that ever got me into reading, A Very Hungry Caterpillar.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
You know why I read that one first? Because that's all I was able to read at that time. Judge.
Yeah. No, but even then, it took me a while. And I was, even in the Army, I remember, though, on my first deployment, I did read a lot of Star Wars books.
I remember you reading a lot when we were over there, too.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, we got DVDs. Are you bored?
I have a computer that has every Nintendo game. Come on.
Yeah, you want to play some video games?
Why are you wasting your time reading a book?
Dude, it's freaking Mario. We could play Mario right now, and you're reading a book. Nerd!
Yeah. No, but again, and after those, I kind of forgotten it, especially after we, the great loss that we took during that deployment with me and you together. I kind of just chunked it and never looked back on when it came to reading.
Yeah, and life was too short. Did you have that? That's what I got.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that it took me until, oh my God, I don't even remember, probably the same time. because even then, my Daryl kept telling me, my mentor, to start reading books, and the only book I read during that time was his. That was the most recent, and so I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to start reading more. And then when I met my wife, she kind of opened my eyes to more readings. I went to her house. She had a library, which I was never familiar. Libraries are in separate buildings owned by the city.
Yeah, that's
it's not a norm for people's homes anymore.
No.
Like we have one now, or we're getting there. But
I kind of have one.
It's growing.
Well, it's growing, but the problem is that it's still full of a bunch of old video game magazines like Nintendo Power and.
Don't get rid of those.
Oh, I'm not going to get rid of them. What kind of an idiot would get rid of that? That stuff right there, man. That's memories.
Yeah, but
of course,
so
I will add one thing to that.
What's that?
It being a memory of all. Of course, I'll wipe those memories out in a heartbeat if the right person comes along with the right amount of money.
Oh yeah, what's crazy is that I remember reading those magazines growing up with my cousin Chris. God bless his soul, he passed away, but I remember he had shelves full of them, and man, those people that writ those magazines were great writers because they weren't big words. During that time, I had to teach myself how to read better. So to be honest, what taught me how to read a little bit better growing up was Final Fantasy.
Really? Because you're forced to read to understand what exactly is going on.
Mm-hmm. And even then, I remember having my cousin Chris right next to me, and he'll read out the characters with different voices to kind of get me into it. And I was reading along, and that's how I knew how to read certain words, especially with Final Fantasy VI, when you have Terra and Locke, and their adventure going out, you fighting Kefka.
Yeah. And that's actually a very in-depth Final Fantasy game. I was like, probably 11, 12 years old when we were playing that game. Mm-hmm. And the story was so much deeper than my little 11-year-old brain could comprehend.
And to this day, I could play it now and still get into it, and not like, even though it doesn't have any like voice dialogue now these days, with today's video games, I don't mind reading it because, at least with my mind, I still have their voices memorized. The way I created their voices with my imagination. And that was kind of like my first step of using my imagination while reading, because, during those games, you had to use a lot of it. The graphics, Final Fantasy VI were great at the time, but they weren't where they're at now that your brain can, has to do the rest, Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Damn, I miss those kind of games now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, I never really got too much into the voice acting side of things. As far as like voice acting goes, like if you look at some of the older Metal Gear Solid games, like those games were legit, but the only voice acting that ever took place was like mostly during cutscenes and whatnot. Yeah. Now, if you play like the new Metal Gear Solid 5, like everything is great in that game as far as gameplay goes, but when they replaced David Hayter with Kiefer Sutherland, it made me want to quit playing the game completely. I'm like, no, David.
Where's he at? Bring me David.
Why would you replace David Hayter with Kiefer Sutherland? I don't care. I don't want Kiefer Sutherland's voice as Snake. I want David Hayter's voice as Snake. This is
yeah. Just like, I forgot his name, the guy who did Batman in the 90s cartoons. Everyone was so upset when they changed him out for a while, and then they had to actually go back and put him back in. But anyways, I digress. But going back to reading, it was a challenge for me because, it was, after those deployments was pretty much the last time I actually really sat down and read a book that was, I'm talking about fiction, though, not nonfiction like Daryl's
for
book,
entertainment purposes.
Yeah, and it took me a while, and I had to seek a purpose in why I want to read it. What am I get something out of it? That takes too much time. I could watch a movie, kind of attitude.
Well, yeah, I guess,
but I had that crappy attitude, and it sucks.
Well, so the problem with watching a movie versus reading the book is that you're kind of subject to the director's vision when you watch a movie. Like movies they can still be subjective to a degree, but you don't get to build the characters up in your own mindset. You have to kind of follow along with what the director has vision for it. Whereas when you're writing the book, you can develop characters all reading the book. I said writing the book. when you're reading the book, you can develop the characters all along throughout the story and kind of get an idea for, who you believe that they are. So if it's an antagonist and like this guy's doing some bad stuff, like you can take it to a whole different level where you're like, this antagonist, like this is my understanding of an antagonist. And it might not be the same as you. You're like, oh yeah, I kind of understand why he's like the Thanos thing. Everybody kind of understands why Thanos was trying to control the population. And I'm nerding out here a little bit, but I understand this. With Thanos, he was trying to control the population for the betterment of the population. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. And so on a human level, you could actually kind of relate to what he was saying because, that's kind of the culture we live in right now, where we're talking about all this weird stuff like climate change and the world's going to end in 12 years and blah, 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 blah. But if you read that same story rather than watching it in the Hollywood movie, like you might never have related to Thanos. You might have been like, no, this guy's a prick. Get rid of him.
Yeah, in the comic books, he did do it for another reason.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, it was for a selfish reason. He wanted to show Death, which was a female, Lady Death, that he wanted to impress her. So he did that. It
was all about a girl. See, here we go again. Women ruin everything. Jeez.
No, so my wife pointed out a few books for me to be like, you should read these, and I'm like, nah, and I got she got me The Alchemist and a couple of Mitch Albom books. And she's like, you have to read these, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to read them. So it took me a while. The Alchemist sat on my bookshelf for the longest time. And finally, on my bookshelf back then was like the 3 books that she got me.
So you can't give me any crap for not reading the book, drawing it out, because I still don't, first of all, I still don't know where it's at. It's not even on my bookshelf. I gave it to my wife. She knows where it's at. No, it's somewhere. I
got you this book. You need to read it. But anyways, I'm gonna tell you why. So when I finally got down to reading it, and I finished it, I wasn't quite there. I appreciated the journey. And it actually took the second time for me to read it to kind of really comprehend what it was trying to tell me and what I learned from it. And it was one of the first few fiction books that I've read in a very long time. Now, listeners, it is one of those books that you've likely heard of, but maybe haven't gotten around to reading it. You've seen it in Barnes & Noble. It's always like a feel-good read or the summer read or springtime, whatever they're advertising at the time. It's always in those sections. To the must-read books, and it's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's a really great book. It's one of those books that you're even like if you don't see it, you probably had a friend that recommended it to you a year ago or whatever, but you just don't recall who recommended it to you, and you just haven't had find time. Everyone, time is a commodity that is actually runs short most of the time, because we wasted on like how I did it back then, watching movies, junk TV, trash TV. But this, once I read it, it's a simple book. It's simple to read, but it had a very powerful meaning in it. And when I read it, I really felt myself again. And I related to the protagonist so much that I was like, maybe I should start reading. And it didn't happen right away. Like, I didn't reread that book right away either. And
you said it was The Alchemist by who?
Paulo Coelho.
Paulo Coelho. I thought it was by Mitch Albom. You're throwing me all sorts. The Alchemist is not?
No, it's not. Mitch Albom, I'm going to get with the next 2 books that I'm going to cover that kind of got me, that kicked me in the butt to get going.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Sorry. But, if you don't want to take my word for it, listeners, I'm telling you, you'll write this book in your search bar in Google, and you're going to find hundreds of lists on the internet telling you why you should read this book and how wisdom was positively influenced, powerful people in the world. Every single president since the book came out has read it. I remember everyone was like wondering why Bill Clinton at the time, when he was in presidency, he had the book in his hand walking into the White House, and I remember a photographer took it. Why is he reading this book? What is this book all about? And so on and so forth. George W. Bush, so on and so forth, from every single president then on has read the book.
I was going to say, I don't know that Bill Clinton is probably the best representative for this book.
Yeah, you're probably right. So one of the things I always get asked is like, why is this book different from any other ones, and why is it so transformative? What kind of, and I think it's because whatever you're going through or whatever you're working towards to or whatever you're seeking to find, the alchemist has a universal message that will meet you where you are as you follow Santiago, which is the protagonist that I'm talking about. He's the shepherd through villages. He goes through all these villages and countries on his quest to reach his quest, but he realizes that the end goal was not the quest. The quest was his venture. And we talked about that, Jeremy, about how trust the journey and all its detours.
Yep. Aerosmith.
Yeah.
Life's a journey, not a destination.
And he finally figured out that the goal that he was seeking, because that's what he was trying to seek, was the knowledge that he gained during the adventure. And that was more powerful than gold,
Yeah.
And the 3 things I took away from this book, which one of them I just shared with you, but the main one is a fear of failure, rejections, and the unknown are most significant obstacles. And it kind of helped me overcome some of those, and then also trust the journey and all its detours. Kind of open that. Always call it the third eye, but not, psychic or anything. It's just kind of
the mind's eye.
Just kind of like knowledge is finally going into my brain. And I was like, oh, wow. Maybe that, PTSD was a suffrage. And, to this day, I'm a little bit still on it when it comes to nightmares that come and go, but I don't dwell on it. It's kind of like I'm in my paddle craft or whatever, going through the waves and the oceans of life. And I'm learning from it, like, okay, this is what I've got from this body of ocean that surrounds me. So
you apply that same principle to like when you have dreams and stuff like that, and you wake up and you're like, oh, the post-traumatic stress dreams and whatever.
Yeah. And I learned from them.
That's good, because what a lot of people make this huge mistake of talking about their past. Huge mistake. You just don't understand. You don't know what I've been through. Like I think maybe I probably might have a little bit of a leg up on a lot of people on as far as what I've been through, and so I tell people whenever I come to that crossroads, like, hey, listen, yeah, you can have a past. There's nothing wrong with having a past. There's nothing wrong with some of the things that you've experienced. But the question is did you learn from it, or do you suffer because of it? And if you didn't learn something from your past, what was the point of going through all of that in the first place? You need to be looking forward, not looking backward. So people that look backwards always trip over going forward.
No, yeah, and I'm about to cover that here next. And before I even deal with the third thing I've learned from this book, and I say this all the time, is we're all connected and everything happens for a reason. You might not see it right there and then because of your frustration, anger, the Neanderthal way of thinking automatically. That's the first thing that kicks in, because back then we had no other choice when we were cavemen. But now that we're smarter and more developed humans, we do now have the choice to sit down and really think on why did it happen to me, and not just to prevent it. What did I learn from it? Going back to what you were saying, Jeremy, and not let it, control me in my life.
Yeah. This is not where I live. This is where I've been. I'm not worried about that, because look at where I'm going.
So while you're digging out of this hole, and digging up and trying to reach that better life and getting yourself out of these situations, we covered it in part 1 is, and I remember bringing it up, was like, you don't ever give up control of your life to anybody or anything or any meaning, and I think that's what it really came down to me when I read this book. And I was like, huh. And, and it like when I put the book down, it didn't happen right away, because the story stayed fresh in my mind for a few days. And for a while I was like, you know what, I kind of thinking like, this is the situation Santiago was in, And so from there I kind of like, okay, let's keep going. And so I was at Barnes and Noble a few weeks later after I finished reading that. And when my wife gave me these books, from Mitch Albom, I didn't really feel like reading them. But there was one book I remember grabbing, and it was also by Mitch Albom. It was called For One More Day. And when I read the back, I was like, huh, pretty much the book was talking about lost, how to deal with loss. And if you had one more day with that significant other or that person that you've lost, what will you do? And at that time, I thought that book was calling to me, because there was times that, again, I remember that time I lost my father.
Mm-hmm.
I lost a really good aunt that was I remember the last words that she told me, and it was really meaningful to me, and I carry it with me all the time. And, and so I was like, maybe this book may have the answers. I always heard Mitch Albom was a great writer, and my wife was like, "Oh, I read that book. That's a good book." And I was like, I looked at her with the eyes like, "Don't tell me how to live my life. I'll figure it out." kind of attitude.
They ruin everything.
Yeah. But one thing I want to quote from the book, and I'll get more into it, is this quote. I actually pulled this book out of my shelf this morning, and I was like, what was that quote? And I found it in the book, and I want to share it with everyone. This is straight from the book. And it says, "I hope you never hear those words, your mom. She's dead. They are different than other words. They are too big to fit in your ears. They belong to some strange, heavy, powerful language that pounds away at the side of your head, a wrecking ball coming at you again and again, until finally the words crack a hole large enough to fit inside your brain. And so doing, they split you apart." And I thought, like, when I first read this book, I was like, wow, and this book is sad, but it never brought me to tears, and that's the next book I'm going to bring up. But I've learned so much from it, and it made me want to reach out and rekindle certain relationships with like my mother and other people that I hold strife against, and kind of like, okay, your time is limited here. Let me cherish something from you, or let me learn something from you. And that's what that book was about, is about this guy who, he's a drunk now. He wanted to kill himself. He's in this ugly accident. He crawls himself out of this accident. He finds himself walking. He leaves the scene of the crime. He leaves the scene. He didn't hurt anybody. He just crashed into a pole, falling asleep drunk in his car. And he, instead of walking to his apartment, he ends up walking to his childhood home, which was not too far from the scene. And when he opens the door, boom, his mom is there. And his mom's been dead. So he's like, what, and he's there having a conversation. And this is his one blessed day, that he has one more blessed day with his mom. And he's there trying to learn all the lessons he can within this day that he has with her. And what's really great about the book is that it goes back to each chapter. Like, he'll talk to his mom, and the next chapter, it talks about a hurtful thing that he's done, that we've all done, Jeremy. We're not perfect. Is the day I let my mom down, the day that I insulted my mother, was like that. So after he gets the questions out of his mom, the chapter goes back to the day I remember I let my mom down. And it talks about the scenario, and it kind of related to me, like, oh my God, I remember doing something like this and it hurt my mom. So it kind of reflected on, I was never a good child. I was bad. There was times I didn't want to go home. There was times I never came home. I stayed out with friends without even calling, and had her worrying, and I come the next morning, all right, whatever, kind of attitude. I thought I was in charge. Teenager, Jeremy, we all thought we were in charge. We knew everything.
Sure. I still do sometimes.
Yeah. So this book spoke to me. And it was crazy because, like, besides what my wife said, and something made me want to grab this book. And that's when I started, like, man, everything happens for a reason. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started dwelling. What made me grab this book? And so I was like, Mitch Albom is such a great writer. Let me try this book that my wife told me to buy in the first place, and which was sitting on my bookshelf, was the next book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. And this book was what did it all, that gave me that boost to go and start reading and changing my life, a complete 180, and get rid of the selfishness, get rid of the greediness, get rid of, all about me kind of attitude. At the time I was dating my wife, we weren't married, so I started, reflecting on treating her better, even though I wasn't treating her bad, but I'm going to give it now more than 100% kind of attitude. And the reason why this book kind of touched me, it was because it's about this guy who he meets 5 people at the day of his death. He dies. Boom. That's it. And before he gets to heaven, he needs to meet 5 people. And these 5 people made a difference in his life, knowing or unknowing. There was a time that this guy always dwelled on someone who pushed him out of the way on the road and saved his life, and that guy died. So that's one of the persons that he meets. One of the people that he met was his commander in Vietnam, his captain, telling him, like, this is what I tried to do and trying to help you, and this is what you did with that lesson later down in life, which helped another. And also one thing that he made, which kind of really spoke to me, and this book made me cry, Jeremy. I've never cried reading before, but this did it. Like, when it came to him speaking with the captain, because I related to that. I was in the military. There was times that we've had those commanders, and I'm saying not the bad ones, because we all have had bad ones, but I've had good ones in my military career that I learned a lot from. Mm-hmm. To this day, I relate to their teachings and I utilize them. But the one thing, the next person he meets that kind of just blows me away, and I started crying, was the innocent life that he took overseas in Vietnam. It was a little girl that he killed by accident. During in combat, you're shooting, the enemy runs. Sometimes you're just in that predicament in life that you don't know if they're innocent or guilty. Like in Jerf, they were in that situation. To this day, it ate at me. Like, did I kill anyone by accident in that schoolhouse when those Iraqis were in there, or did or this, so on and so forth? Because I've taken people's lives, this, Jeremy, and it really dwelled on me with my PTSD. And that book alone kind of like spoke to me, because this little girl was telling them, like, okay, I know you killed me, but I am grateful that you've learned these certain things in life because of that action. And basically the girl forgave him, saying, this was the situation that you're in. I don't blame you. This is not your fault. And that's one thing I've always wanted. You see therapists telling you it's not your fault. That's different. I don't want to hear that from someone who's never been to combat. But in this book, it spoke to me for some reason. It was different than anything else in life, and hearing it in this girl's voice in my head, it's like me telling myself, like, it's okay, Jacob. It's okay. You were in a situation you couldn't control.
Interesting.
So reading The 5 People in Heaven will lead you to the conclusion that it honestly is one of the best books that have ever been written. Hands down. And that's just my opinion. It is a complete page turner. There's not a time. Once you pick that book up, you're not going to put it down whatsoever. And it will leave you with lots of emotions and conflicting emotions as well, to kind of like, okay, this is how I take it. Especially one of those people that he meets out of the 5, it's going to relate to you no matter what. And I guarantee you, listeners, I guarantee it. And if it doesn't, come back to me and let me know. But, I promise you, when you pick up that book, you won't put it down until you're done. And it takes you about one day. I did not put it down. I remember living on Hildebrandt Avenue in an apartment, and my wife came in, and I had tears in my eyes, and I remember telling her, oh my God, why would you tell me to read this book?
So what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing's wrong. Throws the book over your shoulder, pretends it's not there. I'm fine.
Yeah, when a book has a way to make you feel at least 3 different emotions while you read it, to me, it's very powerful, and it's a great book. In the story, you feel really bad for Eddie, which is the main character, but I don't want to spoil too much, because I wrote a lot of notes and it kind of spoils the book. But one of the people he meet is his wife, and that too alone, me. I just got married too at the time when I finally took time to actually read this book, and that kind of lets listeners know I didn't read it. It took me a while to build courage to read it, because, my wife kept telling me over and over, read it. You must read it. You got to read it. And I remember finally when we got married and we're in our new apartment on Hildebrandt Avenue, that's when I decided to read it. And man, it's so amazing. And it's funny. I remember telling you, I don't know if I did tell you, but I think I have. The sequel, The Next People You Meet in Heaven, The Next 5 People You Meet in Heaven, is just as powerful. And this is just another great 5 people that you meet. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it because I know a lot of people haven't read the first one, but that book, I read it on the first gathering that I took you on. Mm-hmm. The one before that. And I remember sitting in my little camping chair, like tears coming out. Oh my God, why am I reading in front of everybody?
What is wrong with me?
Yeah. And the thing is, I found it at the airport.
You found
on the way there. Yeah. I didn't, because I don't keep track of like new books that come out. I'm not that kind of avid reader. I usually, when it comes to the books that I find or I get, is pretty much a spontaneous visit at the bookstore, or my wife and I will go to thrift bookstores or even Goodwill. They have good books. I don't know why people get rid of these great books.
The only problem with Goodwill is sorting through all the junk because they don't put anything in any kind of order.
Yeah. But to go back, the reason why I praise this book is it's a complete page turner, the first one. And you will relate to this character, Eddie, and everything that he's gone through. And you will replace these 5 people with someone in your life, and it won't be on purpose. It will happen just because it will relate to someone that that's no longer here. And you're gonna start thinking like, oh my God, like this is crazy. What if I do find myself? What if something like this is true when I die? And so instead of those questions not being answered and me being like, oh my God, and being antsy and wanting to live that crazy spiritual life, what it did for me was answered a lot of questions that a lot of wise people and very expensive people, if you talk about therapists and the VA paid for and the army's paid for, never had answers to when it came to me. And that book alone just kind of did it all for me, and it was just great. And I'm not saying people and listeners out there that don't get this book for a cure. It's not it, but it will talk to you. And this book, I think I bought this book for you, Jeremy. I don't know if your wife's read it and she loved it. I remember me and Ashley was talking about this, but you need to read. Those are the 2 books that I got you, I remember. And I'm telling you got to read them.
Well, the first part of the problem was you handed them off to her, not to me. So. That seemed to be a common theme here. I have no idea where they're at. Yeah, anyway. So in your estimation, so you talked about, a couple of the kills that took place in Iraq. Let's not dance around it. Let's just call it like it is. There's kills that take place. It's combat, people. Come on, get off. Duh. Mm-hmm. In your mind, after reading this book, how would you probably, God, I don't even know how to phrase this. How would you address this kind of a situation where you were to face the people that you've had to come into contact with in combat? Like if you had to face that guy and he's like, hey, yeah, oh yeah, you're the prick that killed me. You'd be like, oh yeah, well, you were the prick that was running.
No, because that's right there is not the way I think now. But since that I've read that book, I think one of the lessons that taught me from this book was to forgive people that have hurt me, mm-hmm. And also forgive people that I've hurt as well, and which is me forgiving myself. And that's one of the things I think I carried with this book. And now I live a life without regret. Because the biggest thing of PTSD for me was regret. Mm-hmm. Like, man, I should never, pull that trigger or, so on and so forth. And at that time, I didn't know any better but to blame no one else but myself.
Well, you touched on something that's extremely powerful, is the power of forgiveness.
And the other lesson that I taught here, that I was taught reading this book, Jeremy, and that was a good question. Like, what would you see was love as well, as loving myself, first of all, and not just saying I love myself, truly loving myself. And that means taking all my baggage with me as well and loving that too as well. And it really, that right there alone just was great. And also not just about love, is that love is something that lasts forever. The same love that I have, not just for myself, but for my family, my wife now, my son now. And it's a different type of love, You know, it's an undying love, I think I would say. And that's what I've learned from it, because I didn't know what really love was. You know, if you go back to my hectic childhood, living with my aunt and uncle, yeah, they taught me how to say, oh, I love you, at night and stuff like that. But it really never really resonated with me until I read this book and really figuring out and understanding what love was. And yeah, people say, like, you took the different route. You figured out love and this and that through your spiritual journey of church and your journey to Christianity. At least that's what I got from part 2. But for me, this was my route.
Okay.
Was books and learning things that, like a father should teach you.
Well, it does go hand. Yeah. Well, there's that. There's definitely the teaching from the father side, but there's something there's something else that people have to understand is, we look at love and we're just like, it's this feeling. It's, you just know. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
That's not how love works. Love is a choice. You choose to love people where they're at or not. It's that simple. It's not, it's like, okay, well, you can literally choose to not love your son well. You feel like you're like, wait, what? No, that's impossible. How could I not love my son? Well, it's simple, because if you don't love somebody, then it will manifest in how you behave, how you treat them, how you talk to them. Sometimes, and especially with kids, I see this all the time. This drives me crazy. When you see a parent who's like, well, I love my kid, and it's just so hard to say no. That's not loving your kid. Sometimes you have to say no to them. Why? Because they need to understand no means no. So when you actually have to tell them no for a real tangible reason, like running out into the street or something like that, they don't just disobey you immediately. And that practice starts very, very early on, where, if a kid tells you, well, I need, you have to say no. And what's going to happen is the kid's going to be like, well, and they're going to start throwing their temper tantrum. But you stick to your guns, and then eventually the tantrum goes away. When you keep doing this process over a period of weeks, the tantrums slowly and slowly and slowly start just kind of fading off, and then they become more like a whimper. And then they just become like, well, dad says no means no. And that's how you really love your child, is by teaching them that, listen, you're a little tiny person, and I'm setting boundaries for you because I love you, because you have to understand that as you age, when you get into this world, people are going to say no to you. And sometimes you just have to accept no. People are going to set boundaries, and you cannot violate those boundaries just because you want to. So if you want to love anybody where they're at, sometimes love doesn't look like what the world tells us love is.
No, it doesn't. And it's hard
to say no to kids. No, it's really
easy.
It's
hard to really understand what love is, besides what you're told on movies, which is, what you're told in certain books, especially the romance book. That's not love.
That's butterflies in the stomach. What you see on
like rom-coms, the romantic comedies, that's not love. That's entertainment. And what people need to understand is really figuring out what love is, and then from there you reflect on what you love is to you in your own ways, with with your significant other, with your son, your mom, your dad, so on and so forth.
Well, there's certain ways to represent that you're showing love to people, and that's like, for example, one of my love languages has always been gifts. I used to be. It's not anymore, but it used to be that if you wanted to tell me you love me, it was, you bought something for me at the store, or you got a random gift for me or something like that. Like, that was my way of understanding, like, oh, this person obviously has love for me because they went and did X, Y, Z. Well, I got married, so all that's changed, and now I understand love in a completely different manner because she made me do it. And but that's kind of like where you sit, is you have to understand that love, it's that two-way street. So in your situation where you're married, or in anybody's situation where they're married, you look at that whole big broad picture, and you go, okay, like, well, maybe my wife is doing certain things to convey that to me, to speak that language for me, and maybe I'm not reciprocating in the way that she wants me to, and thus that's why she's having a bad day, or that, there's always this little tension that takes place because people just simply don't speak the same language. And thank God for the power of books, because I figured, I was like, have you ever read Men Are From Mars and Women From Venus? That book will explain so much in such a short amount of time. And it blew my mind when I read it the first time. I'm like, oh, wow. That's like a long walk off of a short cliff to figure out what women are thinking.
Now, after I read that book, Jeremy, The Five People We Meet in Heaven, that's when the machine started. Now I am to the, like, I was like, let me reread Alchemist now. Maybe there's something I missed, let me reread it. And then from there I became hungry from reading to read as many books as possible. I remember going to Barnes and Noble, bought $400 worth of books. And not garbage books either. And I was just like, let me learn all this. And it wasn't just any books. I was gathering from great authors, Shakespeare, Faulkner, Dickens, Ernest Hemingway, stuff like, my wife was like, you got to read all these books. So I started going forward on that. Now, and that's when I read The Alchemist the second time, that's when I came up with those lessons that I've learned, and, everything happens for a reason. And that really dwelled on me, because I was like, wow, maybe God pointed this particular woman out to be my wife, to help me on this journey of life, to better myself. And, and that might sound selfish, but now in our marriage, we better off each other constantly. There's things that, that my wife wasn't really like strong, her strongest points, and then her weaknesses are my strengths, and so on and so forth. So we built off each other. And that's when I started learning from these books. And that's when I started, just like now, when I go to Barnes and Noble or even half price books or thrift books or whatever, my mouth is watery sometimes, and just like, where's the books at? Where are the good ones? Because, Barnes and Nobles will have thousands of books, but only have 4 good ones worth buying.
Yeah.
And
that's no joke.
That comes later on. And you learn this from reading other great books. And so that being said, I want to cover some great authors I think people should start off with. And it takes a while to get to some of these authors, because some of these authors are so hard to read. Like William Shakespeare is not an easy read. But once you get into the handle of reading certain kind of literature like that, Shakespeare becomes easy. Like, I love Shakespeare. William Faulkner is one of them. Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, Ernest Hemingway. Man, this guy, the only time he wrote when he was drunk, when you start learning more about Ernest Hemingway, and he lived a very sad life, but man, his books are just amazing. Franz Kafka, this guy he's out there, and his writing is so amazing. Homer, The Odyssey, is one of the greatest books I've ever read. I have 2 copies of them, because one has highlights and one of them is an older edition, because Homer is just, you just have to have his books in your library. C.S. Lewis, he is just a great writer. I don't know what else to say about him. He's my wife's favorite author. She has all his books. George Orwell, H.G. Wells, Ray Bradbury, Edgar Allan Poe, J.R. Tolkien, Plato, and one of my favorites I put last was William Durant. He's a very modern historian, from the 20th to the 21st century, or 20th century, sorry. And so, yeah. And the reason why I wanted to leave out with Will Durant was because I grabbed this book kind of early, and I always call it my cheat book, because I didn't know what books to read for the longest time. And when I picked this up from Barnes and Noble in their philosophy section, which was kind of weird, because he's not a complete philosopher. He's more of a historian, and it took me a while to really figure that out. But this was my cheat book, and this book was, the greatest minds and ideas of all time. And it's a simple read. He really humbles down a lot of points of what great minds and ideas were at the, during his time of moving up. And then like he'll have chapters like the 100 best books, and that's what saved me. I went through that list and ordered every single book that I could find. And he'll tell you exactly what chapters to read from those books to get a true education from. And that's when I started getting enlightened even more. And there was a chapter called the 10 greatest thinkers. And when I found out who those thinkers were and found out they had plenty of books in there, I'm like, well, let me buy their books too. And then so you continue on the 10 greatest poets. Holy crap, let me read these people now. And so that's pretty much how I cheated, was now like, okay, this is great, let's continue on. And so I started buying more. I bought his complete 11 thick books, volume books of the Civilization, and it was such a great read. It took me a long time to get through it, but I went through it. And after I started reading all these books, I think that's when I first started my podcast, Dust Jacket Radio. And it was great. I just kept going, and I was still hungry to this day. You seen my books. I think you almost got mad at me when I told you I was joking around that I sold them all.
Yeah, I did. I thought for sure you were serious. Like, oh yeah, well, did you get all those books packed up? No, I sold them.
Yeah. Yeah. But
yeah, what?
And if you can't find Will Durant out there, listeners, here's the must-read books, I think. And Jeremy might agree or disagree with some of them, but I think they're a great book to start off with, besides the 3 that I mentioned, which I'll recap at the end. But a book to read is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, 1984 by George Orwell, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, Animal Farm by George Orwell again, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Those are just a few of great books. And you're like, oh, I remember reading those as a kid, or reread them. But this time, reread them with a different eye, with a different view of things that we've been teaching you through this lessons that we're trying to teach you on digging yourself out of this rut that you're in, or whatever situation you are in life. I think if you read them now, at this age of just being more wiser, you really understand what you're going to be getting out of these books, like Animal Farm, right, Jeremy? Like, I remember reading that as a kid, but now that I read it again as an adult, it opens a whole nother thing, a world like, oh my God, this is happening right now. Right?
Yeah, I recently just read Animal Farm. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, but it was a fantastic book. And I mean, if you want to understand the minds of politicians, Animal Farm, bam.
And it's not a hard read.
No, any idiot can read it. I did it.
Now let's go. I want to touch back on the 3 books. So if you know what I'm talking, if you don't know where to start, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, For One More Day by Mitch Albom, and The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. And if you like that 5 People We Meet in Heaven, there's also The Next 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom as well. And funny story, though, I would like to share with you, Jeremy, is that, did you know when Stephen King and Mitch Albom were coming up in the world as writers, they were in a band together, and Mitch Albom was a drummer, and Stephen King was actually the guitar player.
I did not know that.
So there you have it. Now, Jeremy, before I even end it, because I know you really had not much to say, is kind of like, what kind of carried you over to kind of get hungry now to read? What was that one book?
Well, I mean, I'd be kind of lying if I told you that there was one book, but rather there was one moment where I got to, actually, I don't even know if I told you this story or not. Let me throw this story at you real quick. I bought a Bible for a buddy of mine. I had it engraved and everything, and I gave it to him. We were on a road trip, and we were in Missouri, I think, when I gave him the Bible, and I said, this is just a gift to help you kind of understand a little bit more, because he's been reading the Bible, but he was reading a King James version. If you've ever read a King James version, that's like reading Latin. I mean, the words are there. You can read the words, but it doesn't make a lick of freaking sense. Okay, so I bought him a book, a Bible that was, I think it was a New American Standard Edition or whatever. Well, anyways, he's like, oh, that's cool, man. I really appreciate it. And we had a few little conversations about it. He said, so where do I start? And I was like, well, you can start Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are like the most important ones to understand as far as like salvation goes. But in your case, you're trying to get wisdom. You're trying to seek knowledge. You're trying to grow yourself, right? So he says, so I said, check out the book of Proverbs. And he goes, Proverbs. Okay. Like that. And he points like this. And I look up and the license plate right in front of us says Proverbs 4:7. So, okay. Yeah, sure. Like that. Look it up. Let's see what Proverbs 4:7 does, cause I'm like, well, I mean, that's a little ironic. So let's go ahead and look up Proverbs 4:7. And so he did. And Proverbs 4:7, if you've ever read it, it says, seek wisdom at any cost. So that means like, let me actually read it says the beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, and with all that you're acquiring, get understanding. And you can look at all the different translations and whatever, but at the end of the day, I was literally pointing him to the book of wisdom, and he read the one scripture in there that was about seeking wisdom at any cost. And that was like, whoa, that was pretty cool. Now I'm a guy that doesn't believe in coincidence. I don't do coincidence because I think that it's kind of a BS idea. So for us sitting in the car to see a license plate that's sitting right in front of us just at the right time that I happen to give him the book, and he happens to turn the book right to the page that's actually talking about getting wisdom, which is what we were just having a conversation about. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is just a coincidence. And maybe
but right there, it was kind of like an overwhelming feeling, right? You're just like, what?
Yeah, I probably said some things that the Bible wouldn't have been too appropriate. Like, do not abide a foul tongue. Sorry.
No, so yeah, I understand that feeling. That's kind of like how my journey was, and still is today. Like I'm reading Admirals because I just finished watching that movie Midway a while back, and I was like, well, I want to start reading about these Navy leaders and all these leaders down World War II, and kind of what made them who they are as men, because regardless what history portrays them as, heroes, superheroes, they're just humans just like us. And I kind of wanted to figure out, like, okay, let's figure out how these guys became, what they are now, idols, and so I decided to read some, Admirals, which was a condensed version. I see it as a condensed biography of, all that, the fleet admirals, Halsey, Nimitz, so on and so forth. So I kind of just wanted to read about them. And it's so great because I learned history, I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. Nimitz was not great in school, just like how I was or whatever. So I could relate to that. And he, just because he was told no one time, he continued on, just like Nimitz pretty much had an Article 15, as an officer related type, which is a reprimand. But, for grounding a boat, that was like a big thing back then. If you ground a boat, your career is over. But from there, now he's the guy he's pretty much the guy who won the Pacific. He's the main guy that was in charge of the Pacific Fleet.
Well, to the one point about that you were speaking about, he wasn't that great in school. I think that we need to kind of delineate something here for just a second. We only have a few minutes left. Let me throw this out there. If you weren't great in school, nobody cares. The only thing that people even care about to a remote degree, unless you're going for some kind of like a ridiculously high level of esteem in academia, and that's how you're going to make your money and blah, blah, blah. The good majority of people, that do not care what you did in school. I was a straight D student in high school. I was a straight A student in college. Did either one of them actually contribute to my life? Zero, none, nada. So take this concept and understand, yeah, you're in school, you're learning some stuff, but your grades don't determine who you are or what kind of a person you can be, or because there's so many variables, right? You can have a crappy teacher. I had one of my kids came home from school 2 days ago, and we were talking about the environment in school, because of course they were, because they got to give these kids something to be afraid of. And the teacher was saying, well, actually, probably the best vehicle that anybody could ever own would be a biodiesel vehicle. And I thought, oh, well, that's true. Do you have any understanding of how much it costs to convert a vehicle over to biodiesel? She said, no. It's rather expensive. Here's another thing. Where do you get the biodiesel from? I don't know. Well, you have to make it. Did your teacher tell you that? No. Okay, well, that's cute. Since your teacher is so concerned about the environment, does she still wear synthetic clothes? I don't know. Okay, well, she should stop wearing synthetic clothes because those are produced through petroleum. And utilizing petroleum is a bad thing for the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
She should probably turn her air conditioner off in the summertime and her heat in the wintertime. In fact, she shouldn't even really be driving a car if she's really that concerned about the environment in the first place. So she should probably stop taking hot showers. Cooking food, use a fire or don't do it at all. You see the point I'm making is like these
Mm-hmm.
people, they give you this little teeny tiny piece of information, and then they go, you should change the world with this little thing. But they negate all other responsibility whatsoever. And so I went off on a little bit of a tangent with the biodiesel thing, but here's the deal is don't get hung up on your grades. Grades mean nothing. Unless you're trying to get into some prestigious college, most of us aren't. Grades don't mean anything. Don't get hung up on the school side of things. It's not that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. You're still going to survive. Matter of fact, Robert Kiyosaki, I think I've told you this before. Robert Kiyosaki says that the A students, they usually end up working for the C students, and the B students end up working for the government. Take that for what it's worth, but there's a lot of truth.
Yeah, Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard.
yeah, there you go. Steve Jobs didn't even finish college.
So, yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Read but definitely, I totally agree with you on the reading side of things. Definitely read if you enjoy reading.
It's back to your power. You choose what you want to educate yourself with.
Yeah,
and yeah, you do have the author and their perspective, but that's now on you to find that good author and that good person to kind of educate yourself with. And that's one thing that Will Durant will bring up. And I want to end this podcast of, don't forget this book, Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time. If you don't know where to start when it comes to reading a good book, I think that'll be a great. And if not, go back to the list that we talked about. And I think Jeremy will write this down on the podcast description. Is To Kill a Mockingbird, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Animal Farm, Catcher in the Rye, and Mice and Men. I think they're all great books, and they're not. I think they're biased in their own kind of way, not unbiased. I'm sorry, unbiased in their own kind of way. So. But you're still getting that education out there. And if we're not careful and not reading these great books, it's going to eventually start happening to us. And that goes back to Animal Farm, right, Jeremy? It's very important to read these kind of books and kind of from there getting like, you know what's going on is really not right.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So on an unrelated note, you said something a couple of days ago on a podcast. I brought it up yesterday. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Let's
tipping stuff
for a little bit of context here. I'm not saying I don't tip.
I'm a very
let's play this real quick, and then we're gonna make the correction.
Tipping and I think is dumb. I miss the European side of like it's not like it's mandated even or frowned upon if you even decide not to tip, because there's many times I don't. And it sucks because I know they're not getting the full like minimum wage, so on and so forth.
So that was a clip out of a show, 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And after I'd published it, and I'm going back, checking audio, I'm making sure that levels are good coming across the platform. And I went, wait. Jacob doesn't tip? Wait a minute. That's weird because No, that can't be right. So I contacted you. Mm-hmm. And well, you just go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, I'm not saying I don't tip. I'm a very gracious tipper. Yeah, no, I do tip, and I tip very generously to the point my wife gets mad at me and how much I do tip. All I'm trying to say is that it shouldn't be frowned upon if we don't. That's all I was trying to say.
Oh, so you were making reference to the European model of not tipping because that's kind of, well, I mean, for context, both of us have actually been to Germany. We've both been in Europe, and tipping is like that's like it's really not something that they do a lot, and that's more of an American custom, and a lot of people might not even know that, but it is an American custom. Jacob is not a greedy prick. That's just that's not how this works.
No,
I mean, I thought maybe it was a Freudian slip. I wasn't totally aware of what exactly you were trying to say, but Jacob does tip.
Yep.
Okay, so
I
there's
tip.
that. Oh, and before we go, Jacob, I got a question for you about books. Have you ever read any physical fitness or well-being books or anything like that?
Like Dave Ramsey and stuff, and like
No,
Max
no,
Lucado
physical
for well-being.
fitness.
Oh yes.
You know,
One of the greatest books I think you should read for that is Salt, Sugar, and Fat.
okay. Well, does it tell you in the book to do some freaking push-ups?
No, it doesn't actually. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a good one.